My name is Dr. Camille Bennett. I'm 35 years old, and tonight I walked into a room where no one expected me to belong, least of all my sister. The gala was hosted at the Penfield Grand in Chicago, a glittering charity event celebrating innovation in global education. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above carefully set tables, and champagne flutes clinked softly amid the hum of polite conversation. Industry leaders from around the world were here. Education directors, philanthropists, tech entrepreneurs, and policymakers. And me, except no one knew that I wasn't just any guest. In about an hour, I'd be introduced as the keynote speaker, the final surprise of the evening. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked through the lobby, invitation in hand. Every step felt surreal. I had been asked to keep my identity a secret until my speech. The organizer said it would make the message more powerful. I had agreed, not because I wanted drama, but because I wasn't ready to deal with what it would mean for my family, especially Vanessa. Vanessa Bennett, my older sister, the star of the family, the one who always got the spotlight and made sure I knew it. She was already here. I spotted her near the front of the ballroom, speaking with two men in navy suits. Her polished blonde bob hadn't changed in years. Neither had her perfect posture, her tailored navy gown, or the ever-so-slight smirk she wore when she knew she was holding court. She laughed at something one of the men said and lightly touched his arm, exuding effortless charisma. Vanessa had been the director of communications at the Global Learning Initiative for 3 years now. It was one of the sponsoring organizations for this event. I knew she'd be here. I just didn't expect my palms to sweat this much. I lingered near the entrance, scanning for the event coordinator who was supposed to escort me to the private lounge. But my eyes kept drifting back to her. God, it had been almost a year since we'd last spoken. Just after I launched the national rollout for AI for Kids, my nonprofit tech program. I had tried to share the news with her, but her response was something like, "Sounds cute, Camille. Just be careful, the nonprofit world eats people alive." It wasn't outright cruel. It never was with Vanessa. Her way of dismissing you was like being slapped with a velvet glove, so soft you almost doubted it happened. Growing up, I was always the creative one, which in our household was a nice way of saying, not Vanessa. She was valedictorian, prom queen, debate champion, Ivy League graduate, fluent in French by age 15. Our parents used to joke that if I got a B+, Vanessa must have sneezed while I was studying. And now here we were, both in the same room, but for the first time, on truly different terms. I smoothed the front of my black silk jumpsuit and adjusted the delicate gold pin on my collar, the one engraved with the initials AI4K. It wasn't flashy, but it meant everything to me. Every late night, every rejected grant, every skeptical glance when I pitched the idea of AI-powered learning tools for underprivileged kids, it had all led here. The hush of a microphone warming up echoed through the speakers. A soft announcement called attendees to begin seating. My moment was approaching. And my sister? She had no idea what was coming. Little did she know that the person she once told, "Maybe it's time to grow up and get a real job," was about to walk on stage as the most anticipated speaker of the night. And nothing, not even the years of her overshadowing me, could prepare her for what came next. If you'd asked anyone who knew us growing up, they'd have said Vanessa and I were the perfect pair of sisters. That's what it looked like from the outside, anyway. Polite smiles at church, holiday cards with matching dresses, family brunches where my mom gushed about how proud she was of her two talented daughters. But they always meant her. Vanessa was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she took her first steps, the world seemed to bow around her. She was the kind of child who didn't just color inside the lines. She drew the lines herself. Every school she went to, she became a star. Straight A's, leadership awards, summer programs abroad. My parents framed her certificates, trophies, even her perfect attendance ribbons. I once brought home a drawing that won third place at the county fair, and Mom smiled gently and said, "That's sweet, Camille. Vanessa won first last year, didn't she?" By middle school, the comparisons had become routine. Vanessa got into the regional science fair. Camille, maybe you should think about trying again next year. Vanessa gave a speech in French at the City Youth Council. Camille, why didn't you audition for the play? You're always so expressive. No one ever called me a failure. But they didn't have to. I lived under the weight of her excellence. I learned early on that the best way to avoid direct comparison was to take a completely different path. So I did. While Vanessa majored in political science at Georgetown and later got her master's in global communications, I stumbled through majors like they were flavors at an ice cream shop: psychology, creative writing, early childhood development. I finally landed on education technology, and that stuck. But by then, the narrative had been cemented. Vanessa was the focused, driven one. Camille was still figuring things out. It didn't help that I didn't climb the traditional career ladder. After teaching elementary school for a few years, I left a stable job to start a nonprofit with nothing but an idea and a half-broken laptop. The idea was simple but powerful. Use AI-powered tools to bring quality learning to underfunded rural schools. But try explaining that to your parents when they're still bragging about Vanessa's promotion to Director of Strategic Messaging. I remember the last Christmas dinner I spent with my family before things really changed. I was excited, genuinely, for the pilot program we'd launched in South Carolina. Over 300 students were enrolled in our first semester. I brought photos, testimonials, data. Vanessa skimmed through them politely and then launched into a long monologue about a partnership she was negotiating with UNESCO. My father beamed. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin. When I tried to bring the conversation back to AI for kids, Vanessa smiled and said, "Camille, I think it's amazing that you're doing something so grassroots, but just be careful. Passion projects don't always pay the rent." I laughed along. What else could I do? But that night, in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would take for my family, especially Vanessa, to see me as something other than the other one. Now, as I stood in the grand ballroom watching my sister sip champagne like she belonged in every room she walked into, I realized something. I didn't need her approval anymore. The person I was becoming didn't crave validation from my family's old definitions of success. I had built something, quietly, slowly, but powerfully. And tonight, the world would see it. A voice beside me interrupted my thoughts. It was Olivia, the event coordinator. "Dr. Bennett, we're almost ready for you backstage." I nodded, heart thudding, and gave one last glance toward Vanessa. She was laughing with a group of donors near the stage. For a moment, she looked almost exactly like the girl I once admired so deeply, so desperately, the girl I wanted to impress. But that girl wasn't my benchmark anymore. I turned and followed Olivia toward the curtain, toward the moment that would change everything. Backstage was quieter than I expected. The din of the ballroom faded behind thick velvet curtains, replaced by hushed instructions from tech crew and the occasional clink of a clipboard. Olivia handed me a small mic pack and smiled reassuringly. "We'll cue you after the award for community initiative. Then it's your turn." Nervous? I gave her a half smile. "Only if I think too hard about who's sitting out there." She tilted her head. "If it helps, I read your story. What you've done with AI for kids, it's incredible." That word, incredible. It still felt foreign when applied to me. For most of my life, people used words like idealistic or scattered or sweet but unrealistic. That's how they described me when I left teaching to pursue my crazy little idea. AI for Kids wasn't born from a place of rebellion. It came from heartbreak. One of my third grade students, Trevor, had missed nearly 40 days of school that year because his mom worked 3 jobs and couldn't afford transportation. He was brilliant, curious, but falling behind, and fast. So I started experimenting. I scraped together a refurbished tablet, downloaded interactive math apps, and designed daily 20-minute custom sessions just for Trevor, tailored to his learning level. Within 3 months, his scores improved by 37%. That's when the idea hit me. What if we could scale this? What if, instead of waiting for systems to change, we built something parallel, agile, affordable, AI-driven? I drafted proposals, cold-emailed education foundations, even pitched at a local innovation fair where one judge asked if I was playing entrepreneur. When I told my family I was quitting my job to build it out full time, Vanessa blinked in stunned silence. "You're leaving your benefits," she said, like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "What about your retirement plan?" I didn't have one. I had hope. I had $2,300 in savings. And I had a mentor. Dr. Alan Trask, a retired education policy expert, heard about my idea from a former student. He invited me to coffee, listened intently for 2 hours, then leaned across the table and said, "Camille, this isn't a project, it's a movement. Let me help you." He invested $10,000 of his own money, connected me to his network, and offered something far more valuable than funding: belief. Still, those early years were brutal. I worked out of my studio apartment, shared Wi-Fi with a neighbor, and pulled 18-hour days building prototypes and grant applications. I taught myself Python and cloud architecture on YouTube. I hosted weekend workshops for parents in community centers, often with just 3 or 4 attendees. And the rejection emails came hard and fast. Too niche, too ambitious for one person. Nice idea, but won't scale. Vanessa called once during that time. She'd just returned from a conference in Oslo. "How's the coding crusade going?" she'd asked with a chuckle. "Still saving the world one recycled iPad at a time?" That one hurt, not because it was mean, but because she truly didn't see the value. She thought I was playing at something, but I kept going. Then, one summer, everything shifted. I partnered with a small school district in New Mexico. They piloted our full program across 5 elementary schools. Within the first semester, math comprehension scores rose by 24%, reading fluency by 19%, and student engagement, measured through login frequency, doubled. A regional education nonprofit took notice. Then came a feature article. Then an invitation to present at the International Education Tech Forum. And finally, this gala. The organizers said my story embodied innovation from the ground up. I didn't tell my family, especially not Vanessa. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I didn't want the moment tainted by her doubt. Or worse, her polite indifference. Tonight, though, that silence was about to break. Backstage, I watched through a slim curtain as the host finished presenting the Community Initiative Award. The applause quieted, and the ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. The host stepped back up to the microphone. "And now," she began, her voice ringing through the hush, "we are honored to welcome a woman whose groundbreaking work is changing the face of education for underserved communities across the country." My chest tightened. She is the founder of AI for Kids, a nonprofit that combines artificial intelligence and human compassion to bridge the educational gap in America's most neglected regions. I took a breath. Please join me in welcoming tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. Camille Bennett. I stepped into the light. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights made it hard to see individual faces, but I could still feel them. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked on me, some curious, some skeptical, some visibly surprised. I scanned the crowd briefly, trying not to search for her, but my gaze landed on Vanessa anyway. She was mid-sip of champagne. The glass paused halfway to her lips. Her jaw didn't quite drop, but her expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids, and I'd beat her in chess for the first and only time. Disbelief, confusion, a tinge of something deeper. I walked to the podium, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. "Good evening," I began, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "When I tell people I work in education, they usually assume I'm a teacher. And they're not wrong. I was. I still am. But the classroom just looks a little different now." A few soft chuckles. The ice cracked. "I used to teach 3rd grade in a Title I school in South Carolina. My students were smart, hungry to learn, but they lacked access. Access to resources, to tutors, to time. And the system, no matter how well-intentioned, was failing them." I paused. One day, a boy named Trevor changed everything. I shared Trevor's story, how his mom couldn't afford gas to bring him to school most days, how he lit up when I showed him the tablet, how he asked if it meant he could finally catch up. That moment stuck with me. It became the heartbeat of everything that followed. I told them about building AI for kids from my living room, about rejection letters, about nights I questioned my own sanity. I spoke plainly, not like a CEO or a thought leader, but like a woman who had learned through stumbling forward, and they listened. When I described our first partnership, the school district in New Mexico, and the dramatic improvement in student performance, I saw heads nodding. People whispered to each other. Phones were pulled out discreetly, likely Googling AI for kids. But what mattered most to me was what I didn't say. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention that the woman sitting in the second row to the left had once laughed when I said I wanted to build something world-changing. I didn't tell them that the person who dismissed me most consistently was now watching me speak in front of her peers, her mentors, maybe even her own board members. Because this moment wasn't about her. It was about me stepping into my purpose, unapologetically. I ended with this. We often think of education as a system to be reformed, but sometimes the best way to serve those left behind is not to repair a broken ladder, but to build a new one entirely, one that's accessible, adaptable, and centered around the child, not the bureaucracy. I let that hang in the air for a second. And if we can do that, if we dare to build better, we won't just be closing learning gaps, we'll be opening doors. The room went quiet. Then someone stood up. Applause erupted, scattered at first, then growing, rising, a standing ovation. I blinked rapidly, willing myself not to cry. I smiled, nodded, stepped back as the host returned to the stage. "Dr. Bennett," she said, turning to me. "Thank you. That was beyond inspiring." I exited stage left to a blur of handshakes, praise, and questions from strangers. My mind buzzed. My heart raced. It was surreal. But one moment pierced through it all. Vanessa. She appeared backstage just as I was taking a bottle of water from a staff member. Her face was still composed, but her eyes, they looked like someone who'd seen a ghost wearing her little sister's face. "Camille," she said, voice low. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. "Vanessa." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she managed, You never said." "No," I replied evenly. "I didn't." "I mean, you're the keynote speaker, that program, AI for whatever, it's yours?" I didn't correct her on the name. Instead, I said, "Yes. It's called AI for Kids. We're working with over 40 districts now." She blinked, lips parting. "You could have told me." I looked her straight in the eye. "I did try once. You said it sounded cute, like a hobby, like a phase." Her cheeks flushed, just slightly. "That's not what I—" "It's okay," I interrupted gently. "You didn't see it then, but now, everyone else does." She looked like she wanted to say something more, maybe to apologize, maybe to justify, but I didn't give her the chance. "I should get back to the team," I said simply, and I walked away. Not out of spite, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need her reaction to validate what I already knew. I belonged on that stage. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind. After I left Vanessa backstage, I was immediately swept into a small reception area for VIP guests and speakers. There, I was introduced to donors, directors of international education programs, and even a few government policy advisors. My business card disappeared faster than I could replenish it, and someone from the World EdTech Alliance asked if I'd be open to presenting in Geneva next spring. The whole time, though, part of my brain stayed alert, half expecting Vanessa to appear again with questions or comments or damage control. But she didn't. She stayed out there, among her peers. Maybe she was still processing. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe both. I didn't blame her. The truth is, it wasn't just Vanessa who had underestimated me. It was everyone. And in a way, I had underestimated myself, too. But now I stood in a different space. Around 9:45 p.m., as I was preparing to leave, a man approached me. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, pressed suit, calm confidence. He extended his hand. "Dr. Bennett, I'm Anthony McNeil, Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Global Learning Initiative." My mind clicked. That was Vanessa's organization. I shook his hand. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. McNeil. I wanted to personally thank you for your speech, he said. It was not only compelling, but clarifying. Clarifying? I echoed. He offered a small smile. Let's just say it gave me perspective on your work and on some recent internal recommendations that frankly missed the mark. It took me a moment to understand. He was talking about Vanessa, about how she must have framed me, probably as her sister who's in nonprofits, or dabbling in tech education, or maybe not someone strategic enough for large-scale collaboration. And now, that narrative had shattered. I'd love to schedule a follow-up conversation, he continued. There's serious alignment between your work and some of our upcoming regional initiatives. I'd be happy to, I said, handing him a card. We shook hands again. I watched him disappear into the crowd, then allowed myself a quiet breath of relief. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving Vanessa wrong. It was about being seen clearly, finally, for the work I had poured my life into. On the way out, I passed through the main ballroom once more. And that's when I saw her again. Vanessa stood alone near the bar, swirling the last of her wine. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between defeat and introspection. Her usual crowd had thinned out. People had either left or migrated to new groups, and she didn't look like she had the energy to follow. She saw me. We made eye contact. I paused, briefly, and gave her a soft, respectful nod. She didn't smile, but she nodded back. That was all. Not everything needs to be a dramatic confrontation. Some reckonings are silent. Outside, the Chicago night was crisp and cool. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the car waiting at the curb. When I slid into the back seat and closed the door, I sat in silence for a moment. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. Emma, my best friend since college, had sent a text. So, did your sister faint or just combust? I laughed, out loud, in the dark, letting the tension of the night melt from my shoulders. Then I texted back, neither. She froze, but the rest of the room stood up. Emma replied instantly, damn right they did. CEO energy. I'm pouring wine in your honor. Make it 2 glasses, I wrote. I put my phone down and looked out the window as we drove past downtown lights reflecting off the river. Everything had changed. And yet the most important change had already happened before I ever stepped onto that stage. I stopped needing permission to shine. The morning after the gala, I woke up to 47 notifications and 1 missed call from my mother. Apparently, news traveled faster than I had anticipated. There were LinkedIn posts already circulating, photos from the stage, snippets from my speech, captions like inspiring words from Dr. Camille Bennett last night, and proud to have been in the room to witness this. Some of them had tagged Vanessa. None had mentioned her directly, but a few comments underneath said things like, wait, is that her sister? Followed by an awkward silence. I hadn't planned for this to go public, but the truth had a way of leaking through cracks, especially when people had spent years pretending it wasn't there. I ignored the messages for the time being and went through my usual routine: coffee, journal, inbox triage. Around 10 a.m., the call finally came. Vanessa. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Hello, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Camille. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not weak, just stripped of its usual polish. Can we talk? I figured we would eventually, I replied, sitting down at my kitchen counter. There was a pause. Then she said, I owe you an apology. I blinked. That was fast. For what? I asked, not to be smug, but because I needed to hear her say it. For last night. For years, probably. Another pause. I didn't know what you'd built, she continued. Honestly, I had no idea. I always thought what you were doing was, I don't know, idealistic. But hearing you speak, seeing the way people responded, it made me realize I've never actually listened to you. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words slowly sinking in. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. Because you never gave me space to. I said. Every time I tried, you'd pivot the conversation or remind me of your own projects or say something like, just be careful, as if you already knew I'd fail. I didn't mean to be dismissive, she said. I was just focused, competitive maybe. May I gave a small laugh. That's the understatement of the year. Vanessa sighed. Look, I know you probably think I'm a horrible sister. I don't, I interrupted. I think you've spent your whole life being told you were the best. That kind of pressure doesn't leave room for curiosity about anyone else. She was quiet for a long time after that. Finally, she said, Anthony McNeil, my director, wants to meet with you about a potential partnership. I told him it was a great idea. I already met him last night, I replied. He approached me himself. Another beat of silence. I guess that's fair, she said, more to herself than to me. There was something vulnerable in her voice. Not defeat, just honesty. Maybe for the first time in our adult lives. I'm not angry, Vanessa, I told her. Not anymore. But I'm also not the same Camille you used to talk over at dinner parties. I know that now. Well, I said, keeping my tone light, welcome to the new reality. She let out a breath that sounded like a mixture of laughter and regret. I'm going to Mom and Dad's this weekend. They want to talk about the gala. You coming? I groaned. That's going to be awkward. Painfully, she agreed. Still, something in her voice sounded different. Like maybe, just maybe, she was hoping it wouldn't be as painful as it once would have been. I'll come, I said, but only if they serve that burnt lasagna Mom calls her signature dish. Vanessa laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. Deal! We hung up a few minutes later. I stared at the ceiling, the morning sunlight spilling across the countertop. There was no explosion, no dramatic showdown, just two sisters, finally talking like adults. And maybe, just maybe, beginning something new. Later that day, I received an email from the World EdTech Alliance, inviting me to speak in Geneva next spring. I forwarded the invitation to Emma with one line. Turns out the kid with the recycled tablet had a few things to say after all. I hadn't been to my parents' house in 6 months. It wasn't for lack of love. I did love them. But our family dinners always came with a thick layer of unspoken tension. Dad would ask about Vanessa's press mentions. Mom would bring up her trips to Switzerland. And when it was my turn to speak, there would be polite nods and an awkward, "That's nice, dear," before someone changed the subject. But this Sunday felt different before I even knocked on the door. Vanessa's sleek black BMW was already in the driveway. I parked behind it and sat in my car for a moment, grounding myself. I wasn't the little sister trying to prove something tonight. I was Camille, CEO, keynote speaker, founder of an organization transforming lives. I rang the doorbell. Mom opened it wearing her usual pastel cardigan and a slightly frazzled expression. Camille, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. You look so grown. I am 35, I smiled. It was bound to happen. Inside, Dad hovered by the kitchen counter, pretending to arrange the wine glasses while clearly avoiding eye contact. Vanessa was already at the table, thumbing through a stack of papers. I couldn't tell if they were work or defense notes. Hi, she said, with an awkward half-smile. Hi, I replied. Dinner was tense at first. We made small talk. The weather, a neighbor who'd sold their house, a new Thai place opening downtown. Finally, over dessert, Mom's infamous overly dry chocolate cake, Dad cleared his throat. So, we heard about the gala. Silence. I saw a clip of your speech, he added. Very moving, very professional. Mom chimed in, her voice higher than usual. Why didn't you tell us you were speaking, Camille? I set my fork down. Because I didn't want to deal with being doubted. Again. They both looked taken aback. Vanessa glanced at me, then spoke up. She's right. Our parents turned toward her, confused. We've been treating Camille like she's still trying to figure things out, Vanessa said plainly. When really, she's been building something extraordinary. Mom looked at me, her eyes suddenly glossy. Honey, I never meant to make you feel small. I took a breath. Maybe not intentionally, but for most of my life, I've been compared to Vanessa. And I never measured up. Not because I wasn't capable, but because my path didn't look like hers. Dad sighed. We just wanted both of you to succeed. And you defined success by Vanessa's resume, I said gently. I don't blame you. I get it. She's brilliant. She's composed. She looks good in a blazer. Vanessa chuckled. But I've spent years doing work that no one in this room ever asked about. Work that matters. You're right, Mom said, reaching for my hand. We were wrong to dismiss what we didn't understand. Vanessa nodded. I did it too. More than anyone. The table fell into a quiet, reflective stillness. Then Vanessa added, I'm learning to unlearn a lot of things about what success looks like. And I'm learning that I never needed validation, I replied. But it's nice when it comes. We all laughed, the kind of laugh that releases tension from the bones. Later, while helping Mom with dishes, she leaned over and whispered, We're proud of you, Camille. Truly. I smiled. That night, as I drove home under a sky scattered with stars, I realized something. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation, of rewriting the narrative, not just for my family, but for myself. I had spent so long trying to be seen, and now, even if I wasn't always understood, I was no longer invisible. Not to the world, not to my sister, and finally, not to me. 3 weeks after the family dinner, I was sitting in the conference room at AI for Kids headquarters when I found myself staring at the organizational chart on the wall. We had grown. Fast. Too fast. What started as a team of 4 passionate volunteers was now a buzzing ecosystem of departments: curriculum, engineering, data analytics, field operations, partnerships. It was beautiful, exhilarating, and overwhelming. I had built a vision, but I couldn't keep running every aspect of it myself. I needed help, real operational help. Camille? Lisa, my head of field strategy, knocked on the glass door. Board meeting in 15. Thanks, I said. But my eyes drifted back to the one blank space on the chart. Chief Operations Officer. We'd been searching for someone with the right balance of discipline, logistics, scalability instincts, and, most importantly, integrity. And, annoyingly, one name kept popping into my head. Vanessa. Yes, I knew how that sounded. Yes, I had a long list of reasons why it was a terrible idea. But I also had to admit the truth. Vanessa was sharp. She understood systems. She could take a message and translate it into global strategy in her sleep. She'd already built internal structures at 2 different nonprofits and launched multi-continent partnerships that stayed under budget and ahead of schedule. She was, in short, the right fit. The question wasn't, could she do the job? It was, should we work together after everything? That night, I called Harold, my mentor, the one who first believed in me when no one else had. Don't say anything, I started. Just listen. I laid it all out. The history, the gala, the apology, the family dinner, the what-ifs. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then Harold said, Let me ask you one question, Camille. Okay. Are you considering her because she's your sister, or because she's the most qualified person you know for the role? I sat with that, and then I said the truth. She's the most qualified person I know for the role. Well, Harold replied, then don't hire your sister. Hire the COO. We met for lunch the next day at a quiet bistro between our offices. Vanessa looked surprised to see the manila folder I slid across the table. What's this? An offer, I said simply. Chief Operations Officer, she blinked. At AI for Kids? Unless you're secretly applying to Starbucks, I deadpanned. She didn't laugh. You want me to work for you? No, I corrected. I want you to work with me. She opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the proposal, responsibilities, expectations, salary. This is a real offer. It's market rate, based on your experience, and the scope of what we're building. She looked up. Why now? Because the mission's too big for ego, I said, and you're the only person I trust to operationalize it at this scale. Vanessa closed the folder gently. You trust me? I met her eyes. Yes, but more than that, I believe in you, just like I wish you had believed in me back then. She swallowed. I saw emotion flicker across her face. "I did," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to show it." "Well," I said, leaning back, "here's your chance." 3 days later, she accepted the offer. We announced her hire quietly at first. Internally, the team was understandably hesitant. Whispers circulated, a few skeptical glances, some assumed nepotism. But Vanessa handled it like a pro. She didn't throw her title around. She didn't walk in with an attitude. She listened. She asked good questions. She fixed 3 broken internal workflows in her first 2 weeks. She took the heat when something went wrong and passed the credit when things went right. Slowly, our team warmed to her. So did I. Working with Vanessa was like learning a new language. We had to unlearn our old patterns, me shrinking back, her stepping forward, and build something collaborative. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competitors. We were a team. And AI for kids? It was about to level up in ways neither of us had dreamed possible. If you had told me a year ago that Vanessa and I would be leading board meetings together, I would have laughed hard. But there we were, seated side by side in the AI for Kids conference room, presenting our quarterly strategic plan to a mix of donors, advisors, and global partners. She handled operations. I outlined vision. It was seamless, natural, and more importantly, it was real. The board had concerns, of course. They always did. Expansion logistics, data privacy compliance, hiring gaps. But Vanessa met each question with calm, precise answers, referencing systems she'd already put in place. At one point, one of our more skeptical board members, Mr. Linton, cut in. "Ms. Bennett," he said, addressing her formally, "your background in communications doesn't exactly scream operations. What makes you confident you're the right fit for this role?" I bristled instinctively, but Vanessa didn't flinch. "I understand the concern," she replied, voice steady. "But over the last 12 years, I've managed budgets larger than this entire organization's current operating expenses, led multinational logistics for simultaneous launch campaigns, and designed internal communication frameworks adopted across 3 continents. And if you'd like, I can walk you through the redundancy protocols I introduced last week that reduced project delays by 17%. Silence. Then Mr. Linton gave a slow, reluctant nod. "That would be appreciated." After the meeting, Lisa pulled me aside. "She's good," she said simply. "I know. But more than that, she cares. You can feel it." I glanced back through the glass walls. Vanessa was still at the table, talking to our engineering lead. She had a notepad open, scribbling ideas, completely absorbed in the moment. That was the difference now. The ego was gone. The showmanship had faded. What was left was someone who truly wanted to help. Our professional relationship had matured faster than our personal one. We were still learning how to be sisters again. But there were moments, small, unexpected ones, that gave me hope. Like the night she knocked on my office door at 9:15 p.m., holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate, and looking like she was debating whether to walk away. "Emergency sugar delivery," she said awkwardly. I grinned. "Come in." We sat on the floor of my office, backs against the wall, sipping in silence. "Do you ever think," she asked suddenly, "that we missed out on being friends?" The question caught me off guard. "I think," I said carefully, "we never really gave ourselves the chance." She nodded. "I used to think being the best was everything. Straight A's, promotions, accolades. And now, I think it's about building something that actually matters. Like this." She looked around the office. "Like you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she added, "I'm still learning how to be your sister, not your critic." "And I'm still learning how to let people help me," I admitted. She chuckled. "Well, at least we're both bad at something." We laughed, together this time. Not one-upping, not competing, just sharing space. Weeks passed. The organization thrived. One morning, I received a call from Harold. "I read your latest grant proposal," he said. "Beautifully structured, clear, efficient. Has Vanessa's fingerprints all over it." "It does," I smiled. "She's made a real impact." "You did a brave thing, Camille." "Hiring her?" "No. Forgiving her." That sat with me. because he was right. It's easy to hold on to pain, to cling to being right. It's harder to let go, to see someone's growth and allow them to change. But maybe that's what leadership really is. Not just building systems or teams, but creating space for transformation in others and in yourself. And for the first time, I wasn't just running a nonprofit. I was building something bigger than both of us. 1 year after the gala, Vanessa and I stood shoulder to shoulder on a stage once again, but this time not as strangers orbiting each other's spotlight. This time we were presenting together. The Global Education Equity Forum had invited AI for Kids to give the opening address, highlighting our newest initiative, a data-driven platform connecting under-resourced classrooms across rural America to a global mentorship network. Vanessa had coordinated every logistics pathway. I had written the vision. Together, we made it real. As the applause faded and we exited the stage, she turned to me backstage and said, "I used to think this kind of spotlight was only big enough for one of us." I looked at her. Turns out we were both just standing too close to the wrong sun. She grinned. "Not bad for the sister who couldn't hold a steady job, huh?" "Not bad for the sister who once called me a hobbyist," I shot back playfully. She winced. "Ouch, fair." We laughed, and it wasn't awkward. Later that night, as we walked out of the venue, we passed by a group of young attendees huddled together, excitedly discussing our session. One of them turned and asked, "Dr. Bennett, can we take a picture with you?" I smiled and said, "Sure, but you'll need both of us in it. This is our COO, Vanessa Bennett." She smiled, a little surprised, not at the attention. Vanessa had always been comfortable with that, but at being introduced by me, not as my sister, but by her own title, her own value. As we posed, I caught her eye. There was no trace of rivalry left there, only respect, and maybe something like pride. That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, a soft breeze moving through the trees, lights of the city twinkling like data points, each one a story, a life, a possibility. I opened my journal. It had been with me since the beginning, the same one I used when sketching out the first prototype of AI for Kids on a kitchen napkin. I flipped to a new page and wrote, "Success is not what they told you it would be. It's not about being first or right or admired. Success is building something honest, letting people change, and not letting the past define the limits of your future." Vanessa and I would never be the sisters who shared clothes or texted memes every night. We had too much history, too many sharp corners, but we had found something better, a foundation of mutual respect, of earned trust, of growth. We weren't competing anymore. We were co-architects of a vision that extended beyond both of us. And maybe that was the greatest healing of all, not in erasing the old story, but in writing a new one together. And this time, we were both holding the pen.